And so thank you all for your time tonight. Thank you all for traveling here and being together so that we can speak with one voice and demand that Washington listen to us. Now, I can tell you what people in Washington are saying right now. I can tell you what many of the elites in the mainstream media are saying. They are saying that all of us in this room are the reason that Washington doesn't work. Are the reason that nothing gets done in Washington. And you think about that, and it's kind of astounding. In the last 12 years, Washington, D.C. has passed McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform. It's passed Sarbanes-Oxley. It's passed Dodd-Frank. It's passed No Child Left Behind. We just had a $600 billion tax increase. It passed Medicare Part D. And it passed Obamacare. If this is not getting anything done, this is something that in the course of history, any of this legislation would have been groundbreaking in the course of history in the way that the founders thought about our Constitution. Friends, Washington, D.C. is not broken. Washington, D.C. is a finely tuned machine aimed at expanding government, restricting freedom, and empowering those who are powerful enough to play the game. But there's a dirty secret. You're right, not for long. Because the only way Washington works is if we don't come together and speak with one voice. Well, on October 1st, sign-ups for the premium subsidies in Obamacare start. And on January 1st, the money starts going out the door. The time to fight is now. But I can stand up here as one person, and I can speak. We need to hear from all of you. And so let me ask you some questions, with all due respect to President Obama. Can we stick together? Yes. Can we make sure that the IRS isn't allowed to enforce the rules of Obamacare? Yes. Can we stick together and make sure that our members of Congress are held accountable to their campaign promises? Yes. Can we defund Obamacare?
Yes. I heard some of you had to stand in line for a while to sign up to get in here tonight, and that was actually by design. We want you to get used to what's going to happen under Obama. So this is the waiting room in the doctor's office. We'll be with you in about 12 to 18 months. Folks, I can't tell you how good it is to be out of the Senate and with you. As soon as I left, good things started to happen. I didn't have to go to the inauguration. The next thing that happened is I didn't have to go to the State of the Union. And every day I get to go to work with about 280 people who share my love of freedom and a love of the country. They're ready to take the battle to whoever is threatening our freedoms and what we stand for. And let's remember as conservatives that what we're for, what it means to be a conservative, is that we want to protect and preserve those ideas and principles that made this country great. We want to protect those things that people dream about and hope for their families and their children, those good jobs. And we know those things that make them happen. We know the government can't do that for people. The government doesn't create jobs or create the middle class. What we're doing is trying to help every American have a better life. Regardless of where they come from or who they vote for, we want to make sure that every American has the opportunity to get their hands on that ladder of opportunity and climb as high as they can dream. That's what we're for. And we do it out of love for country, love for our fellow citizens. Sometimes it doesn't come across that way because we get so angry when we see someone like our president betray those things that we love. It makes us angry. And when we see something like this Obamacare law that violates every American principle that we know, the concept of individual decision-making and individual responsibility, having your choices, having a relationship directly with your doctor and your doctor and you deciding about your care. In the House and the Senate has promised to do it in their campaign, and there have been many chances to stop it. All of them know when they pass a bill in the House that repeals Obamacare that it's going nowhere. Every one of them know if they pass a bill that funds the government but does not fund Obamacare, that that's decision time for President Obama. That's the real thing. That's when you take a risk. And there are a lot of Republicans now saying, we don't want to do that because that might risk losing the House in 2014. Okay? Since when do Americans not fight for what they believe in because they're afraid they might lose? So if there has ever been anything that's worth fighting for as an elected official, this is it. And if we've got representatives who said this is a terrible bill, but we don't want to defund it because that's going to create a showdown with the president. You know, Ted Cruz has been out front on this, and a lot of even Republican leadership didn't like it. And some folks asked him, they said, Ted, why are you taking such a political risk here to get out front on an issue like this? And you know, he said, well, that's what I promised I'd do when I ran for office. Here's how it works. If Republicans pass a bill in the House, which they should do as soon as they get back in September, that funds the government in its entirety, but leaves out any funding for Obamacare, and they can do that, and those who say they can't just don't understand how the system works. We do it every year. We say no funds shall be allowed for this, and it happens all the time. So we can do it, and we can stop Obamacare in its tracks by doing it. And if they did that, and then they took the case to the American people, who are a lot smarter than they think they are, and say, folks, we funded the government, and we've sent the bill to the Senate and to the President. So if the government shuts down, it's the President wants to shut it down to protect this failed law. We can win that argument. Americans are smart enough to understand. I want to go back to where Mike was, too, with how this really happens. And I saw this so much when I was in the Senate, and I kind of started rocking the boat when I realized we couldn't change the way Washington worked until we changed the people who were there. And a lot of those people were Republicans that needed to be replaced. The folks said it's impossible to change Washington, said you can never get rid of earmarks, you can't change it. Republicans and Democrats didn't want it. They loved to take home the bacon, so they wanted to protect earmarks. But we took the case to the American people. We talked to folks all over the country for several years. Everyone knew what the bridge to nowhere was. They knew what the waste and fraud and what taking home the bacon for money with money we didn't have. And what happened is about 75% of Americans thought we should get rid of earmarks. And in 2010, new senators and congressmen like Rubio walked in the door who had committed to get rid of earmarks. And folks, we did the impossible, not because of anyone inside the Congress. It was because the people decided to do it, and they elected people to do it. And I heard of so many other things that were impossible, and a lot of them are called senators now. Because the establishment said there was no way. I mean, Ted Cruz, he was 2% in the poll, running against a very popular Republican establishment in Texas. No way on this earth did he have any chance to win. The only chance he had is if the people decided he should be a senator. And he won overwhelmingly.
Okay, we have some questions from the members of our audience, and I'd like to go ahead and delve into them if I could. Senator Demint, we have a question. How can Obamacare be defunded if it's an entitlement program? And this is from Sue Woods in Tampa, Florida.
It's a good question, and there's been a lot of propaganda that said that if it's an entitlement or if it's mandatory spending, then you can't cut the funding. But that's completely false. As I said before, every year we pass amendments. Like for over 20 years, there's always the Hyde Amendment on every spending bill. It says no funds shall be used to fund abortion. And that has been in place for years. And we can do that for Obamacare simply by labeling the bill, no funds shall be used for this, and it ties it all in knots and it stops it. So those who say it can't be done are using a Congressional Research Service study that says if the government shuts down, mandatory spending continues, which is true. We're not talking about shutting the government down. If you cut the spending out of a spending bill, they cannot continue to implement Obamacare. So that power is in the hands of Republicans in the House.
Very good. Very good. Well, my next question is to you, Mike. This is from John Yaselka of Wesley Chapel. And he writes, why is the House of Representatives so emasculated and or timid regarding the challenges of the administration in challenging the administration's policies? Do they control they control the purse strings, right?
No, that's exactly right. The problem in Washington is that politicians try to set expectations as low as possible so that they can't help but trip over them, as opposed to setting expectations high to inspire people like you to get behind them and go out and do something great. I was talking to a senior Republican leader a couple weeks ago, and he said, you guys at Heritage Action don't get it. We can't inspire the American people from Congress because our approval rating is 12%. And he looked at me like I told him for the first time that the world was round. When I said, maybe the reason your approval rating is 12% is you don't inspire the American people. And so politicians don't lead. Politicians follow the currents that you all set. And that's why it's important that you all are out here. That's why it's important that you all show up at member of Congress town halls. You call them, you call their office. They need to be forced by you all to do the right thing. They won't do the right thing by themselves.
Good. Our next question to Senator Demint comes from Betty Olson. And she writes, do you believe as I do that Obamacare has less to do with improving our health care and more to do with the federal government using as a means by which they can redistribute wealth and manipulate and control we the people?
That's a great question, and it's very insightful because we know from Heritage, from doing so much research about history and tyrants and socialists, folks who want collectivism or want government control, top-down control, have always pointed to healthcare as the best way to get control of the people. If you can control their health, and even some of our founders warned us of that. So they know that this is not just about healthcare. It's the pretense of giving people better health and better healthcare. But we know already that the federal government can't do that. We know if you look at programs like Medicaid, that you can actually look at research that shows that people who are on Medicaid are less healthy than those who have no insurance at all because of the way it's set up. And so this is not about giving people better health care. The fact is, I think people will get better health care under the current system who are not insured, just go into the emergency room, people can't be turned away. Then what they're going to get when they get these programs, which are effectively Medicaid insurance, doctors aren't going to want to see them coming. They're going to close their practice, and it's going to affect people you don't think it'll affect. A lot of you here are probably on Medicare already. It's already hard to find a doctor. If your doctor is taking numerous more Medicaid and government-paid patients, they're not going to want to see any new Medicare patients either. So it affects folks who don't know it. But the point is true. The folks now in charge, President Obama and those who support him, are more interested in control than anything else. And that's what all of, whether it's Dodd-Frank or Obamacare, everything is controlling, and redistribution is a big part of it. And they feel like if they can control it, they can make your life better. There's no evidence of that, and frankly, all the evidence is to the contrary.
Okay. To you, Mike. This is from Judy Hart in Tampa, Florida. I'm getting tired of politicians calling Medicare and Social Security entitlement programs. I paid into these for over 40 years, and I resent them acting as if I were leeching off the government when I am entitled to what I paid for. Why are they always picking at these programs first?
Yeah, look, politicians, our country has huge fiscal problems ahead of it. And people are owed the Social Security that they paid into. At the same time, People have to, we need a lot of intergenerational love going on between people who are owed something, but maybe some of them have to make changes to that program to ensure that it can continue to exist. And an entire future generations who have $63 trillion of unfunded liabilities that are due to them. But people are never going to be willing to make that sacrifice unless we start killing all the waste, fraud, and abuse that goes on in this government. 1 in 7 Americans are on food stamps. People at Fox News did an incredible documentary a month ago. There are people who go into homes and take people who don't want to be on food stamps and encourage them, almost at the point of forcing them to get on these food stamp programs so that states can get more money from the federal government. And so we need to go through the entire federal budget, start from scratch, and say, what does a common sense, modern, 21st century American government look like that's affordable and isn't going to bankrupt future generations?
Let me jump in on that just because Social Security and Medicare are the only true entitlements. People are entitled to them because they paid for them. But as we add programs like Obamacare and we're spending money we don't have, we already don't know how we're going to keep our promises for Social Security and Medicare that people have paid for. But every time we add a program like Obamacare and actually pay for it by cutting from Medicare, we're threatening the folks who've actually paid into the system. And that's why I hope seniors will become our greatest ally in defunding Obamacare, because it will become a threat to the programs that you are actually entitled to.
Next, Senator, what should you put in place of the Affordable Care Act that will hold insurance companies accountable? This is from C.I. Schumacher.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because some in Washington have said Republicans don't have an alternative. And one of my primary reasons for running for the House was health care. I've worked in health care a lot in my life, and there were some obvious things we could do to make health insurance more affordable and available to every American. My goal is that every American would have access to a health plan that they can afford and own and keep from job to job, keep into retirement. And if we did some common sense things, for instance, make it as easy for an individual to buy a health plan as a business, let you deduct it from your taxes just as businesses do, allow you to buy health insurance anywhere in the country rather than just here in Florida. Insurance companies aren't accountable because in every state, 1 or 2 dominate because they have a monopoly. But if you could buy from any state in the country, you would have dozens and dozens of plans competing for your business, just like with term life or something like that. They're trying to get the price down because they want to sell it to as many people as they can. And so that's something simple we could do. We could allow small businesses to come together and pool their employees to offer less expensive insurance. None of this costs the government anything. It's just allowing people to have the freedom as individuals that we're giving to others. If we did any just basic lawsuit reform, which some states have done, it saves hospitals. We don't need a 1,000-page bill and 20,000 pages of regulations to do these common sense things. We can make the best system in the world better. We don't need to replace it with what we know will be one of the worst systems.
And Mike, this question comes from Lisa Jordan from Homosassa, Florida. Why does the Republican Party have so much trouble competing on the tech level, meaning social media? The Democrats are beating the pants off of us in this arena. Are there any plans to change this?
It's a very important question, and I think there's 2 equally important answers. One is that we don't just have a tech problem. Scott Walker won his recall election by 7 percentage points in June of 2012 with the same technology that the Republican Party used in Wisconsin 5 months later, when they lost by 7 percentage points. That is a 14-point swing that happened in 5 months in the same state with the same technology, the same infrastructure in place. And so the first problem that we have as a party is that we need to have a soul. We need to lead. We need to inspire people. And the second problem, and this gets to directly answering the question, is that there are a ton of consultants in Washington, D.C. who get very, very rich off of using the same tactics that worked 30 years ago but aren't winning elections today. President Obama, in 2008, we made a mistake. We made fun of President Obama for being a community organizer. And I agree, look, the guy's he's never met a payroll in his life. He's never had a job in the productive sector of the economy, but he wins elections by being a community organizer. They call it hyper-localization of politics. And the reason that we have field staff all across the country, the reason that Karen is here in Tampa, is to work with all of you, so that you can take the message to your network of friends. The left doesn't just have somebody on every single college campus. They don't just have somebody on every single college dorm. They have they have a professor on every single They have somebody on every single floor of every single dorm on the college campuses who know the issues, go around the dorm and spread the message, and make sure that people understand the left's view on issues, make sure they register to vote, make sure they turn out to vote. And so we need all of you to take responsibility within your sphere of influence. You know who the conservatives are. You know to make sure they vote. You know who's persuadable. And make sure that they have the right facts. You might even be able to convert a liberal. And that can't be done with TV ads. That can't be done from Washington, D.C. It can only be done by empowering people, trusting the grassroots, trusting your voters, trusting your base. And unfortunately, the Republican Party doesn't do that.
Amen.
So we don't need hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. We need all of you on social media, going door to door, talking to your friends, talking over the dinner table to save this country. And that's why we've invested in the ground game. We don't spend hundreds of millions of dollars on TV, even though the campaign guys get a 15% cut in that. We're about empowering you all, because you all are the ones who can change the future of the country.
Senator Demint, can the Republicans explain why the corporate tax rate should be decreased to encourage more economic growth and jobs? We're losing dollars trying to raise pennies, and this is from Lisa Jordan of Homo Sapien.
Yeah, great question. I've spent most of my life in business. It does make a huge difference what the taxes you pay. America has the highest corporate tax rate in the world right now, which means our products cost more because they're taxed more. And so much of the business now is international, particularly with manufacturers. They leave with an embedded cost of taxes that makes it hard to compete. And you add unionization and other government regulations, and you get 7-8% unemployment in America. So the more money you leave in the private sector, whether it's in the hands of individuals or businesses, the more it churns and creates more opportunities and jobs. Obama and the progressives honestly believe that our economy is driven by government spending. That's why they go apoplectic when you talk about cutting government spending. We have all this conversation now about the sequester, about how it's devastating. The sequester over 10 years doesn't cut anything. And matter of fact, we planned on increasing spending 69% over 10 years. With the sequester, it's a deep, deep cut to now we only increase it 67%. Now, it's terrible in the way it pulls more from a military that is already devastated and continues Obamacare and social stuff that we don't need. And that way it's bad, but it's not cutting spending. But get back to the point, the progressives really believe that the government drives the economy. So that's why spending more is good, austerity is bad. But I know from being in business that every dollar you leave in the private sector, it is going to work its way around multiple times. When you earn it and you pay it to an employee, that employee takes it to a dry cleaner or to a movie, they hire more people, it just ripples throughout the whole economy. When you bring it to the government, that multiplier effect goes away. And in fact, it creates a long-term liability because it becomes a part of baseline spending. So money that comes to the government is not helping to create jobs. And so it's hard to explain that to people who go to liberal universities and don't learn how our economy works. But there truly is an invisible hand in a free market economic system that creates incredible opportunity if you just leave the resources there.
Hey, Mike, news reports, and this is pretty much a softball one, news reports that we can't stop Obamacare, too much money already invested. Do we have that option of defunding without implementing Obamacare?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. While Senator Demint was speaking, Andrew, who's on the team at Heritage Action, showed me a news report that just came out. And in Nevada, one of the most unionized states out there, Harry Reid won his election because the unions turned out to vote. The AFL-CIO came out today and condemned Obamacare. Tampa came out several weeks ago and said Obamacare is going to put an end to the 40-hour work week. Max Baucus, the man who wrote the bill, Max Baucus called it a train wreck. So I hear from the media all the time, you guys with your commitment to principle, why won't you do something that's bipartisan? Let's do something bipartisan and get rid of Obamacare.
This one goes to, I hope I'm saying this right, Ione Townsend of Plant City. And they write, how can we take health care benefits away from people already benefiting from Obamacare? Isn't that mean?
I'm not aware, other than those who are 26 and still on their parents' insurance, which the insurance companies are starting to offer anyway. The way to do that is to make sure that a young person can have their own policy when they go to college, and that it's affordable and available so that they don't have to worry about being on their parents' plan or even a job. I mean, if they're still going to graduate school, they ought to have to be able to have access to a plan. So what is mean is when you promise people that you're going to give them something that you don't give. And it's mean for the president to say, if you like your insurance plan, you can keep it. It's mean for the president to promise the whole country that the average cost of a policy will go down $2,500 when it goes up $2,100. That's mean when you don't tell the truth to people. And when you promise the poor that you're going to give them quality health care, but you know no doctor is going to want to see them at what they're paying, that's mean. So the false promises that are being made, there's no compassion there. It's all about control. The most compassion you can have is when you help people pull themselves up and have dignity in their lives and personal responsibility. Those are the things we believe in, and I believe it's available to every American if we can just get that across to every American.
And Mike, this question, they didn't write who they're from, but it says, is the GOP, Conservative Party, finally going to stand up to Obama and stick to their concepts?
Well, the answer's in this room. But I think, long-term, I'm optimistic about the GOP. The reason I'm optimistic about it, did you know that every single Republican nominee for president, since Ronald Reagan, with the one exception of our friend John McCain, every other Republican nominee for president opposed Ronald Reagan in 1980. George H.W. Bush ran against him, Bob Dole ran against him, George W. Bush supported his father, and Mitt Romney was Democrat at the time of Reagan-Bush. Compare that to Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was 10 years old when Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. Or Scott Walker, or Rand Paul, Nikki Haley. We have a generation of politicians who actually believe the stuff that our party claims today it believes in. They came of age listening to Ronald Reagan. I have in my car CDs of Ronald Reagan's 1970s radio addresses. I urge all of you to buy them. They're incredible. And they remind you what we're fighting about. And so we have a generation of politicians who are coming in who actually believe the ideas that they speak about. Every single time a primary goes on, there's a rush to go to the Reagan Library. And politicians should stumble over themselves to talk about how much they're in line with Ronald Reagan. We now have a generation of politicians who mean it. And so I'm very optimistic that in the long term, and the question where our role comes in is how long or how short can the long term be, that we will have politicians who stick up for principle and fight the same fight that worked for Ronald Reagan. And every time we do, we win. Ronald Reagan had won in a landslide in 1984. The 1994 election was a landslide. The 2010 election was a landslide. Ted Cruz ran as a Reagan conservative. Marco Rubio ran as a Reagan conservative. Scott Walker ran as a leader who took on the labor union and showed leadership like Ronald Reagan.
And Latinos are really conservatives inside.
Absolutely.
That's
All
relative.
businesses, commitment. So I'm very optimistic about the Republican Party. It's going to take a lot of hard work to make sure we get there.
How do we keep them from fighting?
Before I start talking about how do we do it, I heard a very inspirational story just a few minutes ago as I was sitting in my chair. Sitting next to me is a lady by the name of Madonna Lindsay. And Madonna was telling me that she, by herself, turned 24 liberals to vote for Romney in the last election. Now, do you think that if every person in this room had done like Madonna and turned 27 liberals to vote conservative, the election in Florida would have been different? Yes. That's the power of the grassroots. If one person did it, every one of us can do it. And I'll tell you, that's what this is all about. I love the Constitution of the United States of America, but as much as I love the Constitution, I love the Declaration even more. Yeah. The Declaration begins by telling us that the rights that we have come from our Creator. That's right. Not from our government, they come from our Creator. And if they come from our Creator, no one can take them away. That's why the government wants you to believe that they are the ones who hand down those rights. But if it comes from government can take them away. And they are doing so, disregarding what the Constitution says. As a matter of fact, if you continue reading the Declaration, the very next thing it says when it talks about those rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it says that government is instituted to protect those rights. That's right. To protect those rights, not to deny you those rights. And then as you continue to read in the Declaration, it says that government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. Now I'll tell you something. We, the people, have not given this government the consent of imposing Obamacare upon us. So we need to shout it from the house top. We deny them the consent to impose Obamacare upon us. But I'll tell you, I am very encouraged. I am very encouraged because as I travel around the country, the groups are getting bigger. We, the people, are starting to make a difference. It is not coincidental that the first 3 words in the Constitution are "we the people" in humongous letters. So nobody can forget who we the people are. And I'll tell you something else. Those politicians that Senator Demint talked about that are afraid, they don't want to commit because they are afraid what could happen in the future. You can put the fear of God on those politicians. You can hold them accountable. And let me tell you how you hold them accountable. There is a website called don'tfundit.com. D-O-N-T, no apostrophe, don'tfundit.com. Right now, there are about 380,000 signatures in that website. If we can get that website in the next 40 days above 1 million signatures, that is a powerful force to pressure your politicians, pressure your representatives, pressure your senators. This is what we, the people, are demanding. Now, you hold those politicians accountable. You vote with the will of the American people, or the will of the American people is going to vote you right out of office. So I want to encourage you to do a second thing tonight. Go home, get in front of your computer, and sign up for donfunded.com. Add your signature to donfunded.com and tell everyone you know. We need over 1 million signatures to send a clear message to the Hill. We, the people, are demanding that Obamacare be defunded. To go back to the Declaration a couple more times. In the Declaration, it also says that when the government ceases to represent the people, we, the people, have the right to remove that government. And that right is coming up in 2014. Through the ballot box, we can make them shake in their boots. You vote the right way, or we're going to vote you right out of office. I want to close with the last few words of the Declaration of Independence. When those framers said, relying upon the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Well, you know, our lives, the quality of our life is eroded more and more every day. We are seeing our freedoms curtailed more and more and more every day. The challenge is that here it didn't happen like it happened to me. I mean, I saw my freedoms removed overnight. And it was very stark, very clear. What has happened here is that it's been a little at a time. A little at a time. And we have been complacent. And we remain complacent. And we remain silent. But we can be silent no more. No more. But let me tell you something. They can take our lives. They can take our treasure. But the one thing they cannot take is our honor. Don't sit down. Stay standing. Because I want to close, I want to challenge you to make a pledge together with me. Not a pledge to me, but a pledge to each other. Let's make that pledge of the post-amble of the Declaration to each other. Turn to somebody and say, relying upon the protection of divine providence. Come on, say it. Say it to one another. Relying upon the protection of divine providence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our treasures, and our sacred honor. If each and every one of us does that, we will take this country back. We will